The ancient armor hung in the center of the vast exhibition hall, suspended by invisible force fields that made it appear to float in the dim, blue-tinged light. Visitors from across the galaxy stopped to stare at the impossible relic, their various forms of eyes, compound, crystalline, or energy-based, drawn to its haunting presence. Dr. Keth Ara, the museum's chief xenoarchaeologist, stood before a group of visiting scholars from the Galactic Historical Society. Her forearms gestured gracefully as she spoke, her translator device converting her melodic Velthari speech into the common tongue. This artifact, she began, her voice carrying the weight of centuries of study, represents one of our greatest archaeological mysteries. We call it the Phantom Armor of Xerion Prime. It was discovered in the ruins of a dead world at the edge of the Veil Nebula, buried beneath what we believe was once a great temple. A reptilian saurid delegate raised a clawed hand. Doctor, the records show that 17 different species have attempted to don this armor over the past millennium. All have failed. What makes it so selective? Dr. Cathara's head tendrils swayed thoughtfully. The armor appears to possess some form of consciousness, or at the very least an incredibly sophisticated security system. When any being attempts to wear it, the armor becomes intangible, like trying to grasp smoke. Our scans reveal technology, beyond our current understanding, possibly from a civilization that existed before the Great Silence. The Great Silence. Even mentioning it sent ripples of unease through the gathered delegates. That mysterious epoch, over 50,000 years ago, when dozens of advanced civilizations simply vanished from the galaxy without a trace, leaving behind only ruins and artifacts like this. But surely, pressed a gaseous Etherian, its voice emanating from a containment suit, with our combined technological might, we could force it to respond? We've tried everything, Dr. Kethara replied. Quantum manipulation, psionic interface, even temporal displacement fields. The armor remained waiting, as if it knows something we don't. As the group moved on to the next exhibit, none of them noticed the small maintenance worker who had been listening from the shadows. Marcus Chen, the only human on staff at the Museum of Dead Civilizations, stepped closer to the armor display. His brown eyes reflected the artifact's strange inner glow. Unlike the distinguished delegates, Marcus wore simple gray coveralls and carried a toolkit that had seen better decades. He wasn't supposed to be in this section after hours, but his curiosity about the armor had been growing for months. As the museum's environmental systems engineer, he'd noticed something the scholars had missed. The armor's energy readings spiked whenever he was nearby. Marcus glanced around the empty hall, then pulled out his tablet to check the security rotation. The next guard wouldn't pass through for another 20 minutes, his heart hammered as he approached the display case controls. "This is stupid," he whispered to himself. "This is really, really stupid." But his hands were already working, using his maintenance access codes to temporarily disable the containment field. The armor settled gently to the floor with a sound like distant thunder. For a moment, Marcus simply stood there, staring at the artifact that had confounded the galaxy's greatest minds. Up close, he could see details that the displays couldn't capture. The armor wasn't quite black, it seemed to absorb light and somehow make it richer, deeper. Strange symbols pulsed along its surface, but they weren't carved. They seemed to exist just beneath the material like veins of light running through dark water. "Hello?" Marcus said softly, feeling foolish but unable to stop himself. "I'm probably the least qualified person to be here, but..." The symbols flared brighter. Marcus's breath caught. He reached out slowly, his hand trembling as it neared the breastplate. The air around the armor felt different. Charged, alive, expectant. His fingertips made contact. The museum's lights went out. Emergency power kicked in a heartbeat later, bathing everything in red warning light. And in that crimson glow, Marcus Chen stood transformed. The phantom armor had flowed over him like liquid starlight, conforming perfectly to his human frame. Where before it had seemed too large for any being to wear, now it fit him as if it had been crafted specifically for his body. But that wasn't the most shocking thing. The most shocking thing was that Marcus could hear something he'd never heard before in his life, a sound that sent ice through his veins and fire through his soul, the sound of a galaxy screaming. Chapter 1, First Contact Protocol, 24 hours later. The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been called with unprecedented urgency. Representatives from 12 major species packed the circular chamber on the neutral station of Harmony Point, their various forms of agitation filling the air with a cacophony of sounds, smells, and energy signatures. Chancellor Vorthak, the ancient crystalline who had presided over the council for 3 centuries, called for order with a resonant chime that vibrated through every being present. We convene this emergency session to address the incident at the Museum of Dead Civilizations. Dr. Cathara will present her findings. The Velthari archaeologist stood, but her usual composure was shattered. Her forearms shook as she activated the holographic display at the chamber's center. Honored delegates, what I'm about to show you will challenge everything we thought we knew about human capabilities. The display flickered to life, showing security footage from the museum. The gathered representatives watched in stunned silence as the human maintenance worker approached the armor, touched it, and was seemingly consumed by it in a burst of darkness and light. This footage is unedited, Dr. Cathara continued. The bataille transformation occurred in 3.7 seconds, but that's not the extraordinary part. She manipulated the display, showing energy readings and sensor data. The moment the human made contact with the armor, every quantum sensor in the museum registered an impossible spike. The artifact didn't just respond to him, it recognized him. Ambassador Felnara of the Aquatic Peoples rose from her life support tank. Are you suggesting the armor was specifically designed for humans? That's impossible. Humans have only been spacefaring for 2 centuries. This artifact is older than most of our civilizations. I'm not suggesting anything, Dr. Cathara replied. I'm stating facts. The armor has been dormant for millennia. The moment a human touched it, it activated systems we didn't even know existed. High Counselor Zekmoth, whose insectoid features betrayed no emotion, clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. Where is this human now? That's complicated. Dr. Cathara shifted uncomfortably. After the transformation, he disappeared. Not walked away, disappeared. Our sensors lost track of him entirely, but we've detected energy signatures matching the armor's frequency in 17 different star systems over the past day. Murmurs of alarm rippled through the chamber. Faster-than-light travel was one thing, but instantaneous translocation across galactic distances was theoretically impossible. Chancellor Vorthak's crystalline body pulsed with concern. What are the implications of this development? Dr. Cathara took a deep breath. Honored Chancellor, based on our analysis of the armor's activation patterns and the legends surrounding its origin, I believe we may have just witnessed the awakening of what the ancient texts called the Final Guardian. The chamber erupted in chaos. Every delegate began speaking at once in their native tongues, creating a storm of sound that the translation systems struggled to process. The Final Guardian was more myth than history, a legendary figure from the time of the Great Silence said to appear when the galaxy faced its darkest hour. Order. Chancellor Vorthak's chime rang out again, but it took several attempts to quiet the assembly. Dr. Cathara, you're speaking of legends. I thought so too, she replied, until 3 hours ago, when our deep space monitoring stations detected something emerging from the void beyond. The holographic display shifted, showing a star map of the galaxy's edge. At the very rim, where space gave way to the unknown darkness between galaxies, something was moving. Multiple somethings. Preliminary scans suggest a fleet of unknown configuration and impossible size, Dr. Cathara continued. They're moving toward the galactic core at speeds that should tear apart any known material. And they're broadcasting on frequencies that have been silent for 50,000 years. Ambassador Thren of the warrior caste slammed his armored fist on his podium. You're saying the Great Silence is ending? That whatever destroyed those ancient civilizations is returning? I'm saying we need to find Marcus Chen, Dr. Cathara said quietly. Because according to every legend, every myth, every whispered story passed down through the ages, He may be the only one who can stop what's coming. Meanwhile, in the Vega system, Marcus materialized on the bridge of a derelict ship that had been drifting in space for millennia. The armor, his armor now, he realized, had brought him here with a purpose he was only beginning to understand. The ship's corridors were filled with the preserved remains of beings he didn't recognize. They were tall, graceful, with elongated limbs and faces that spoke of intelligence and sorrow. In their hands were weapons that had clearly been useless against whatever had killed them. But Marcus wasn't here for the dead. He was here for what they had been trying to protect. In the ship's central chamber he found it, a crystalline data core that pulsed with the same energy as his armor. When he approached, the crystal resonated, and suddenly his mind was flooded with images, memories, knowledge that wasn't his own. He saw the galaxy as it had been 50,000 years ago, a vibrant tapestry of thousands of civilizations, all connected by trade, culture, and mutual respect. He saw the first scouts returning from beyond the galactic rim with reports of something vast and hungry moving in the darkness between stars. He saw the desperate alliance form to face the threat. Beings of incredible power and wisdom, working together to create defenses, weapons, and finally, guardians. The armor he wore wasn't just a relic. It was a key, a weapon, and a prison all in one, created by the combined knowledge of those ancient civilizations, designed to bond with a specific type of consciousness, one that could make the impossible choices that were coming. A human consciousness. As the visions faded, Marcus understood why he had been chosen, not because humans were special, but because they were new, untainted by the failures of the past, unburdened by the weight of ancient knowledge that had paralyzed the previous guardians when the moment of truth arrived. The armor spoke to him, then not in words but in pure understanding. The enemy was returning, the devourers of light, the silence bringers, the things that existed in the spaces between thoughts and fed on the death of dreams. And this time, they weren't coming to conquer. They were coming to finish what they had started 50,000 years ago. The complete extinction of consciousness itself. Marcus felt the weight of the galaxy settling on his shoulders, and for a moment, the magnitude of what he faced nearly crushed him. He was a maintenance engineer from New Detroit, not a cosmic guardian. He fixed air recyclers and artificial gravity generators, not existential threats to all life. But then he thought of the museum, of Dr. Kithara's kindness when she'd found him studying the exhibits after hours of the children from a dozen species who came on field trips and looked at the ancient artifacts with wonder in their eyes. He thought of home, and Marcus Chen, the reluctant guardian of a galaxy he was only beginning to understand, set course for the darkness beyond the stars. Chapter 2. The Weight of Ancient Sins. Galactic Council. Emergency Command Center, Harmony Point Station. The command center, buzzed with activity as beings from across the galaxy worked together with desperate efficiency. Holographic displays showed the approaching threat, a fleet of impossible size and configuration emerging from the void beyond, moving toward the galactic core like a plague of metal locusts. Admiral Kextar, the grizzled Saurid who commanded the combined galactic defense fleet, studied the tactical displays with growing dread. His reptilian features were etched with concern as he addressed the assembled commanders. "The enemy fleet is massive beyond comprehension," he growled, his voice carrying the weight of 30 years of military experience. "Our best estimates put their numbers at over 10 million vessels, each one larger than our biggest dreadnought. They're moving at relativistic speeds that should be impossible for objects of that mass." Dr. Kithara stood beside him, her forearms working frantically over multiple data streams. "Admiral, we've been analyzing the energy signatures from the approaching fleet. They match patterns found in ruins throughout the galaxy, sites we always assumed were destroyed by natural disasters or internal conflicts. You're saying these devourers, they're the ones responsible for the Great Silence?" Admiral Kextar's scaled hands clenched into fists. "Not just responsible, Doctor," Kethara replied grimly. "According to the data we've recovered from ancient sites, they've done this before, multiple times. The galaxy has risen to sentience and been harvested at least 7 times in the past million years. The revelation hit the command center like a physical blow. Officers from a dozen species exchanged looks of horror and disbelief. The idea that their entire galactic civilization was just the latest in a cycle of growth and destruction was almost too much to process. Ambassador Thren stepped forward, his warrior's instincts cutting through the philosophical implications. What are we dealing with tactically? Can they be fought? Dr. Cathara brought up historical records from the most recent cycle. The ancient civilizations called them the Silence Bringers. They don't just destroy planets or kill populations. They consume consciousness itself. Every thought, every dream, every spark of awareness becomes fuel for their existence. That's impossible, protested Chief Science Officer Yelandra of the Energy Collective. Consciousness isn't a physical thing you can harvest, isn't it? Dr. Cathara challenged. We use quantum consciousness transfer in our medical procedures. We've mapped neural patterns and created artificial intelligences. If we can manipulate consciousness, so can they. On a scale we can barely imagine. Admiral Kextar studied the tactical projections. How long do we have? At their current rate of approach, they'll reach the outer colonies in 48 hours, came the reply from a junior officer. The core worlds in 72. Mobilize everything, the Admiral ordered. Every ship, every defense platform, every planetary shield generator. I don't care if it's held together with prayer and salvaged parts. If it can fight, I want it armed and ready. Admiral, Dr. Cathara said quietly, the historical records suggest that conventional weapons are ineffective against them. The ancient civilizations had technology far in advance of ours, and they still fell. Then what hope do we have? Admiral Kextar demanded. Before Dr. Cathara could answer, every display in the command center flickered. For a moment, static filled the screens, and then a figure materialized in the center of the room. It was Marcus Chen, but transformed. The armor had changed him, or perhaps revealed what had always been there. He stood taller, moved with fluid grace, and his eyes held depths that spoke of impossible knowledge. Yet underneath the cosmic significance, he was still recognizably human, still the maintenance worker who had been curious about ancient artifacts. I'm sorry for the dramatic entrance, Marcus said, his voice carrying harmonics that hadn't been there before. The armor has enhanced my capabilities, including the ability to project myself across galactic distances. Admiral Kextar's hand moved instinctively to his sidearm. You're the human who activated the artifact. Are you responsible for this invasion? No, Marcus replied simply. But I am responsible for stopping it, or failing to stop it. The armor has shown me what happened before, the choice that was made, and the price that was paid. Dr. Cathara stepped forward, her scientific curiosity overriding her caution. What choice? Marcus's expression grew somber. The ancient guardians faced the same decision we face now. The Devourers can't be defeated through conventional means because they exist partially outside our reality. They feed on consciousness. Yes, but they also embody the absence of consciousness. The void between thoughts, the silence between words. He gestured, and the holographic displays showed images from the armor's memory banks. Vast battles fought across space and time. Entire star systems turned to ash. Billions of beings struggling against an enemy that couldn't truly be killed. The only way to stop them is to deny them what they seek, Marcus continued. To create a barrier between their realm and ours powered by conscious sacrifice on an unimaginable scale. The implications of his words slowly sank in. Ambassador Thren was the first to speak. You're talking about genocide, killing entire populations to power some kind of barrier? Not killing, Marcus corrected. Transforming. The conscious minds of an entire galaxy willingly given can create a quantum lock that seals the Devourers away for another 50,000 years. Long enough for new civilizations to rise, to grow, to face this choice again. And if we refuse? Admiral Kextar asked, though he already knew the answer. Then in 72 hours, there will be no more thoughts in this galaxy. No more dreams, no more hopes, no more love or wonder or curiosity. Just silence, stretching across the stars until the universe itself grows cold and dark. Dr. Kethara's voice was barely a whisper. How many would have to transform? Marcus closed his eyes, and when he opened them, they shimmered with unshed tears. All of us. Every conscious being in the galaxy. The barrier requires the combined mental energy of trillions of minds, freely given, to hold back something that exists beyond the normal laws of physics. The command center fell silent, except for the hum of machinery and the distant whisper of air recyclers. The magnitude of the choice before them was crushing: sacrifice everything they were to save everything they loved, or lose both in the darkness that was coming. There has to be another way, Admiral Kextar said finally. There has to be. Marcus looked at him with infinite compassion. I hope so. The armor is still showing me things, teaching me things. Maybe together we can find a third option, but we have 72 hours to do it. He paused, then added quietly, and the devourers are accelerating. In the void beyond. The herald of the Silence Bringers contemplated the approaching galaxy with something that might have been hunger. If it had possessed anything resembling biological drives, it was vast beyond measure, its form shifting between dimensions, existing as much in the spaces between reality as in reality itself. Around it, the great fleet moved through space like a cancer through living tissue. Each ship was a nightmare, given form, geometries that hurt to perceive, propulsion systems that violated causality, weapons that could unmake the very concept of existence. The herald remembered the last harvest, 50,000 years ago. The terror of the prey species, as they realized what was coming, the desperate alliance between bitter enemies, the final futile gesture of the guardians who thought they could trade their lives for their children's future. It had been amusing. This time would be different. This time, the herald had learned from the previous harvest. The barrier that had held them back was powered by unified consciousness, the combined will of an entire galactic civilization focused on a single purpose. But consciousness was fragile. It could be corrupted, divided, turned against itself. The herald reached, out across the vast distance, its influence touching the edges of the galaxy. Here, a planet consumed by civil war. There, a species driven mad by their own technology. Everywhere, the seeds of doubt and division that would make the final harvest so much easier. Let the new guardian come. Let him learn the terrible truth that his predecessors had discovered too late. Some choices were not choices at all, but the illusion of choice given to those already doomed. The herald's attention turned to a small blue world in an unremarkable spiral arm, where a species called human had recently learned to split the atom and dream of touching the stars. Perhaps it was time to teach them what their dreams would cost. Chapter 3. The Human Variable. New Detroit, Earth, 72 hours earlier. Sarah. Chen sat in her small apartment, staring at the letter from the Galactic Cultural Exchange Program. Her brother Marcus had been selected for a maintenance position at some alien museum, a job that would take him thousands of light years from home and everything he'd ever known. She should have been happy for him. Marcus had always been curious about the universe, always asking questions that made their parents uncomfortable. When first contact had happened during their childhood, while most humans had been afraid or suspicious, Marcus had been fascinated. But something felt wrong about this opportunity. It had come too easily, too perfectly timed with his application to the Xenoarchaeology Institute, almost as if someone had been watching, waiting for the right moment to pluck him from his ordinary life and drop him into something extraordinary. Sarah never got the chance to voice her concerns. The transport ship had arrived that very evening, and Marcus had left with nothing but a small bag and a promise to write regularly. That had been 6 months ago. His letters had stopped coming 3 weeks ago. Now, as Sarah sat in the growing darkness of her apartment, every screen in the building suddenly flickered and came alive. Her tablet, her television, her smart mirror, all of them displaying the same image. Marcus, but not the Marcus she remembered. He stood in what looked like the command center of a massive space station, wearing armor that seemed to drink light and reflect stars. His eyes held depths that spoke of impossible knowledge, and when he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that made her bones vibrate. "Sarah," he said, and despite everything that had changed about him, she could still hear her little brother in that voice. "I'm sorry I couldn't write. Things got complicated." "Marcus?" she whispered to the empty room. "How are you?" "I don't have much time," he continued as if he could hear her. "There's something coming, something that threatens not just Earth, but every thinking being in the galaxy. I need you to understand what's about to happen because you might be the only one who can help me find another way." The image shifted, showing vast fleets of impossible ships moving through space, and behind them, things that hurt to look at directly, entities that existed in the spaces between thoughts, feeding on the death of dreams. "The armor I wear, it's more than just protection. It's a repository of knowledge from civilizations that faced this threat before. They all made the same choice in the end. They sacrificed themselves to build a barrier that would hold back the darkness for 50,000 years. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face. "Marcus, come home, please just come home." "I can't, Sarah, not anymore. The armor has bonded with me permanently. I'm the guardian now, whether I want to be or not. But maybe that's not the end of the story." The image showed Earth from space looking fragile and beautiful against the star-filled void. "Humans are different, Sarah. We're new to the galaxy, untainted by the failures of the past. The other species look at this threat and see only two choices: sacrifice or extinction. But humans, we've always been good at finding third options, at looking at impossible situations and saying, what if we tried something crazy?" Sarah understood then why she'd felt wrong about Marcus's selection for the exchange program. It hadn't been random. Someone or something had been looking for the right type of consciousness, one that could think outside the patterns that had trapped every other species facing this choice. "The armor has shown me glimpses of other possibilities," Marcus continued. "Ways that might exist to fight back without destroying everything we're trying to save. But I need help. I need someone who knows me, who can remind me what it means to be human when the weight of the galaxy threatens to crush everything I am." The image began to flicker, becoming unstable. "I'm sending you coordinates. There's a ship coming to Earth, not to evacuate but to recruit. The galaxy needs human ingenuity now more than it's ever needed anything. We're the wild card that the Devourers didn't account for. Marcus, I love you, Sarah. Tell Mom and Dad. Tell them I'm trying to be the son they raised me to be. Someone who fixes things instead of breaking them." The screens went dark, leaving Sarah alone with the weight of impossible knowledge and a choice that would define not just her future, but the future of consciousness itself. Harmony Point Station. Present time. The human delegation arrived at Harmony Point aboard a hastily retrofitted cargo vessel that looked like it had been built in someone's garage, which, according to its captain, it essentially had been. Sarah Chen stepped off the transport wearing simple clothes and carrying a backpack that contained everything she owned. Behind her came a small group that represented the absolute best and worst of human nature. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a theoretical physicist who specialized in impossible equations. Commander James Morrison, a military strategist who had never lost a battle. Dr. Priya Patel, a xenopsychologist who understood alien minds better than most aliens understood themselves. And Jake Spider Harrison, a hacker who had once broken into the Galactic banking network just to prove it could be done. They were, by any objective measure, completely outclassed by the cosmic forces arrayed against them. They were also exactly what the galaxy needed. Dr. Kethara met them at the airlock, her forearms moving in what Sarah had learned was a gesture of respectful greeting among her people. "Ms. Chen, your brother spoke of you often during his time at the museum. He said you were the practical one in the family." "He was always the dreamer," Sarah replied. "I just tried to keep him from floating away entirely. Perhaps that is what we need now." someone to keep the dreamers grounded in reality. Dr. Cathara led them toward the command center. The situation has deteriorated since your brother's projection. The Devourer fleet has begun active jamming of our communications. Several outer colonies have gone silent. Commander Morrison stepped forward, his military bearing evident even in the alien environment. What's our tactical situation, Doctor? Hopeless. By conventional standards, Dr. Cathara replied with brutal honesty. We have approximately 12,000 ships of various classes. They have over 10 million. Our weapons are designed to fight other physical beings. Theirs are designed to unmake the concept of existence itself. Dr. Vasquez, who had been quietly analyzing the energy readings displayed throughout the corridor, spoke up. These Devourers, you say they exist partially outside our reality? Yes. They inhabit the quantum spaces between dimensions, feeding on consciousness but not truly limited by physical laws. Then maybe we're approaching this wrong, Dr. Vasquez mused. We're trying to fight them with conventional physics, but what if we could trap them using unconventional physics? Dr. Cathara's head tendrils swayed with interest. Explain. Consciousness affects quantum states. It's been proven in laboratory conditions. Observation changes reality at the subatomic level. What if, instead of sacrificing consciousness to power a barrier, we could use consciousness to rewrite the fundamental rules that allow the Devourers to exist? Spider Harrison looked up from his tablet, where he'd been attempting to hack into the station systems just to see if he could. That's either brilliant or completely insane, possibly both. The human condition in a nutshell, Sarah said quietly. They reached the command center where Admiral Kextar and the other military commanders were coordinating what looked like a futile defense. The tactical displays showed the approaching enemy fleet now close enough that individual ships could be resolved. Each Devourer vessel was a nightmare given form. Geometries that shifted and writhed, surfaces that seemed to exist in more than 3 dimensions, propulsion systems that left tears in spacetime itself. Admiral, Commander Morrison said, studying the displays with a professional eye. What's the enemy's tactical doctrine? They don't appear to have one in any conventional sense, Admiral Kextar replied. They simply move forward and consume everything in their path. No formations, no strategies, no apparent coordination beyond the most basic level. Dr. Patel frowned. That's odd. Any species advanced enough to build those ships should understand military tactics. Unless, Sarah said slowly, they don't think of this as a war. They think of it as harvesting. The implications of that statement hit the command center like a physical blow. If the Devourers saw galactic civilization as nothing more than crops to be harvested, then they wouldn't bother with military tactics any more than a farmer would develop battle strategies for wheat. There, Spider said suddenly, pointing at one of the displays. Do you see it? See what? Admiral Kextar asked. The pattern. Look at how they're moving. It's not random. They're following quantum probability cascades, writing the wave functions of potential futures to arrive at the outcomes they want. Dr. Vasquez stared at the display, her mind racing. If they're manipulating quantum probabilities on that scale, then we can too, Sarah finished. We just need to figure out how to make the improbable become inevitable. At that moment, every screen in the command center flickered, and Marcus appeared again. But this time, his projection was unstable, shot through with interference that spoke of desperate circumstances. Sarah, he said, his voice distorted by quantum static. I don't have long. The Devourers have detected my presence. They're trying to corrupt the armor's systems, turn it against the galaxy. Marcus, where are you? Sarah demanded. At the edge of everything, he replied. The barrier between our reality and theirs. I've learned something important. The Devourers aren't invincible. They're parasites dependent on consciousness to exist. Without something to feed on, they fade back into the void. His image flickered, becoming more unstable. But here's the thing. They can only feed on consciousness that accepts their existence. Fear makes them stronger. Despair feeds them. But if an entire galaxy could somehow reject their reality, refuse to acknowledge their existence, transmission cut off, leaving only static. Sarah stared at the blank screen, her mind racing with the implications of her brother's words. Around her, the greatest minds of galactic civilization struggled to process what they'd just heard. "He's talking about a psychic revolution," Dr. Patel whispered, "getting trillions of beings to simultaneously deny the existence of something that's about to kill them all." "It's impossible," Admiral Kexitar said. "You can't coordinate that kind of mental unity across an entire galaxy." "Maybe you can't," Sarah said, turning to look at the assembled beings with something that might have been hope beginning to kindle in her eyes. "But maybe we can." She walked to the central display, her human perspective seeing possibilities that millennia of conventional wisdom had hidden from the other species. Every species here has spent thousands of years learning to accept the universe as it is. Humans have spent our entire existence refusing to accept anything as impossible. We split atoms that weren't supposed to be splittable. We flew when physics said we couldn't. We went to the stars when the universe said we should stay home. She gestured at the approaching enemy fleet. They exist because reality allows them to exist. But what if we could convince reality to change its mind? For the first time since the crisis began, something like hope began to stir in the command center. It was a mad plan, born of desperate circumstances and human stubbornness. It was also the only plan they had. Chapter 4. The Consciousness War. Hours before galactic convergence, the retrofit had taken place with desperate efficiency. Every communication array, every quantum transmitter, every psionic amplifier in the galaxy had been networked together into a single, massive, consciousness broadcasting system. If it worked, it would be the greatest achievement in galactic history. If it failed, there wouldn't be anyone left to remember the attempt. Sarah Chen stood in the primary control room aboard Harmony Point Station, surrounded by beings from across the galaxy. The diversity would have been breathtaking under other circumstances. Crystalline Etherians, serpentine Naga, the plant-like Verdani, mechanical constructs, and dozens of others, all working together toward a common goal. Dr. Vasquez emerged from the Quantum Processing Center, her hair disheveled from 18 hours of non-stop work. "The mathematical framework is solid, but Sarah, you need to understand, we're essentially trying to rewrite the fundamental constants of reality. If we get the calculations wrong by even the smallest margin, we tear a hole in space-time and destroy ourselves," Sarah finished. "Yeah, I got that part. But if we do nothing, we're destroyed anyway. At least this way, we go down swinging." Commander Morrison looked up from the tactical displays. "The good news is that every major government has agreed to participate. The bad news is that we're asking every conscious being in the galaxy to perform a synchronized mental exercise they've never attempted before, with less than a day of preparation." Spider Harrison, whose fingers had been flying over multiple keyboards for the past day, finally looked up with bleary eyes. "The network is as ready as it's going to be. Every major population center is connected. But Sarah, you need to understand. This isn't just about broadcasting instructions. Someone has to serve as the focal point, the consciousness that guides all the others." Sarah felt the weight of implication settling on her shoulders. "You're saying someone has to be the conductor of this cosmic orchestra?" "More than that," Dr. Patel interjected gently. "Someone has to be the lens through which trillions of minds focus their rejection of the devourer's existence. The mental strain alone could be lethal." "Then it's a good thing I've had practice dealing with impossible situations," Sarah replied, with a smile that didn't quite hide her fear. Dr. Cathara approached, carrying a small device that pulsed with the same energy as Marcus's armor. "We recovered this from the museum's quantum resonance chamber. It's attuned to the same frequency as your brother's consciousness. If you wear it during the procedure, it might help you maintain contact with him." Sarah took the device, a simple pendant that felt warm against her palm. "Thank you," she said softly, slipping the chain around her neck. Immediately, she could feel something, a distant presence that was unmistakably her brother, though changed by forces beyond her understanding. "Marcus, can you hear me?" The response came not in words but in emotions. Relief, love, and underneath it all, a bone-deep exhaustion that spoke of battles fought in spaces between reality. "I'm here, Sarah. I've been trying to find another way, but time is running out. The Devourers are almost at the outer rim." Admiral Kekstar's voice cut through the psychic connection. "All stations report ready. Enemy fleet will reach the Centauri colonies in 6 hours." Sarah moved to the central control console, her hands shaking slightly as she placed them on the quantum interface. Around her, beings from across the galaxy took their positions at subsidiary control points. Each represented their species' contribution to the grand experiment they were about to attempt. "Remember," Dr. Vasquez called out, "consciousness affects quantum states, but only when it's unified and focused. Every mind in the galaxy has to be thinking the same thought at the same moment, and that thought is?" asked Ambassador Thren. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the pendant's warmth against her chest and her brother's presence at the edge of her awareness. "Simple. You don't exist. You never existed. You cannot exist." "Will that be enough?" Dr. Kethara asked. "It has to be," Sarah replied, "because the alternative is that nothing will exist. The void beyond." Simultaneously. Marcus floated in the space between spaces, his armor the only thing protecting him from dissolution in the quantum foam that surrounded the Devourer fleet. The armor had taught him to see reality as it truly was, not solid matter and empty space, but probability waves and consciousness-shaped quantum fields. From this perspective, the Devourers were even more terrifying. They weren't just ships and entities, they were holes in existence itself, places where consciousness went to die. Each one was surrounded by a field of absolute negation, a sphere of unbeing that consumed not just matter and energy, but the very possibility of thought. But Marcus had also learned something that gave him hope. The Devourers' power came from their ability to convince reality that they belonged there. They were masterful manipulators of quantum probability, able to make their existence seem inevitable, natural, necessary. What they weren't prepared for was the one thing no previous civilization had ever attempted: a coordinated rejection of their reality by every conscious mind in the galaxy. Marcus felt the moment when the consciousness network came online. Suddenly, he wasn't alone in the void. Sarah's mind touched his, and through her, the minds of trillions of beings across the galaxy. The diversity was staggering. Each species thought differently, perceived reality through their own unique filters, but all of them were focused on the same impossible goal. "We're with you, Marcus." Sarah's voice echoed across the quantum foam. "Tell us what to do." Marcus reached out with senses enhanced by the ancient armor, feeling the fabric of reality itself. The Devourers were like a cancer in the quantum field, but cancer could be rejected by a healthy immune system. Focus on the impossibility of their existence. He broadcast to the Galactic network. They violate every natural law. They shouldn't be able to exist in our reality. Reality knows this, it's just been convinced otherwise. Help reality remember the truth. What happened next was unlike anything in the galaxy's recorded history. Trillions of minds, representing hundreds of species with radically different ways of thinking, somehow achieved perfect synchronization. United by their diversity, focused by their desperation, they spoke with one voice across the quantum dimensions. "You do not belong here. You cannot exist here. Reality rejects you." The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The Devourer fleet, which had been moving inexorably toward the galactic core, suddenly found itself fighting the fundamental forces of existence. Their ships, which had violated physics through sheer mental dominance, began to phase in and out of reality as the universe itself turned against them. But the Devourers were not helpless victims. They were ancient, cunning, and they had faced resistance before. The herald of the Silence Bringers reached out across the void, its consciousness pressing against the galactic network like a vast, cold intelligence seeking cracks in their unity. "You think your combined will can unmake us?" The herald's voice echoed in the minds of every conscious being in the galaxy, carrying with it the weight of eons and the absolute certainty of entropy. We are older than your stars. We have consumed galaxies beyond counting. We are the inevitable, end of all things, and inevitability cannot be denied. Some minds in the network wavered. The sheer age and power of the Herald's presence was overwhelming. But Sarah's voice cut through the cosmic despair like a blade of pure human stubbornness. You're nothing but a parasite that's gotten too comfortable. Her words carried not just defiance, but something the Herald had never encountered before: amusement. You want to know what's inevitable? Change. Evolution. The universe getting tired of old patterns and trying something new. And right now, the new thing is you getting evicted. The Herald recoiled, genuinely surprised. In all its eons of existence, no species had ever responded to its revelation of cosmic futility with laughter. Fear, yes. Despair, certainly. But laughter? You find your own extinction amusing? I find your confusion hilarious. Sarah shot back, and across the network something unprecedented happened. Trillions of beings facing the literal end of consciousness itself began to laugh. It wasn't hysteria. It was the sound of life refusing to be cowed by death, of hope thumbing its nose at inevitability, of every species in the galaxy suddenly understanding what humans had always known, that the universe's cruelest joke was also its greatest gift. Nothing was truly inevitable. The laughter became a weapon more powerful than any physical force. It was consciousness asserting its right to exist not through violence or sacrifice, but through the simple, revolutionary act of refusing to take the cosmic horror seriously. The Devourer fleet began to dissolve. Ships that had existed for millions of years found themselves unable to maintain coherence in a reality that no longer acknowledged their right to exist. The Herald itself, the ancient intelligence that had orchestrated the harvest of 7 galactic civilizations, felt its grip on existence loosening. This is impossible. It raged, its voice becoming fainter as reality itself began to forget it had ever existed. Impossible is what we do best, Sarah replied, and with those words, she spoke for every species that had ever looked at the universe and decided to make it better, instead of accepting it as it was. The Herald's final scream echoed across dimensions as it and its entire fleet were not destroyed, but simply edited out of existence. The quantum foam that had birthed them forgot they had ever been born. The void between galaxies closed the wounds they had torn in space-time. Reality itself exhaled, relieved to be free of a burden it had carried for far too long. In the space between spaces, Marcus felt his armor beginning to change. The ancient technology, created to fight a war that had finally ended, was transforming into something new. Not a weapon or a prison, but a bridge. A way for consciousness to reach across the vast distances between stars and say, "We are here. We are alive. We refuse to be forgotten." Is it over? Sarah's voice reached him across the quantum foam, carrying with it the exhausted relief of every mind in the galaxy. It's over, Marcus confirmed. But Sarah, I can't come home. Not the way I was. The armor has become part of me, and I've become part of something larger. I'm the guardian of the spaces between spaces now, making sure nothing like this can threaten consciousness again. I know, Sarah replied, and Marcus could feel her tears across the dimensional barrier. I'm proud of you, little brother. You fixed the biggest thing anyone's ever had to fix. As the connection faded, Marcus felt himself settling into his new role. He was no longer Marcus Chen, the maintenance worker, but he wasn't entirely the cosmic guardian either. He was something new, a bridge between the human and the infinite, carrying the best of both into whatever came next. Behind him, in the galaxy they had saved, life began to return to normal. But it would never be quite the same. Every species now carried the memory of what they had accomplished together, proof that consciousness, when united in purpose, could reshape reality itself. And in the depths of space, where the Devourer fleet had once threatened all existence, new stars began to form from the quantum energy released by their banishment, stars that would one day nurture new forms of life, new types of consciousness, new dreams that would refuse to accept the impossible. The galaxy had learned to laugh at the dark, and the dark had blinked first. Harmony Point Station, 72 hours later.